Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property.
Well, it's Russell Quirk on Conveyancing Matters. What can we say? Hello, Mr. Q, how are you?
Into the lion's den. Good morning. Yes, I'm well, thank you.
Oh, I don't know. Pussycats, eh, Stu?
Oh, something like that, yeah.
As we were just saying off air.
Yeah.
So, Russ, we've got various things we want to talk to you about. Lovely, and welcome, and thanks ever so much for joining us. Shall we start off, because we're at the beginning of 2022, with your, well, predictions is perhaps the wrong phrase, and most people won't share a view about where they think the property market's going, particularly because they think it's going to be quite volatile by the end of the year. You tend to be one of the people who is prepared to share that information and moreover, actually, back it up properly with stats rather than just hanging out the window and seeing which way the wind's blowing. So what's your view on the market, Russell?
Yeah, I guess I also happen to be one of the rare so-called experts that calls these things and often is right.
Yes, but far be it from me. I thought I'd let you say that, Russ, obviously.
Well, it does amuse me, actually. At the beginning of the pandemic, of course, the most uncertain times ever and so on, there were lots and lots of experts, particularly the big corporates, the Savills and Knight Franks, and of course the Bank of England and HSBC and goodness knows who else. They immediately jumped on the opportunity to grab some PR. And of course, I think very lazily said, well, pandemic equals house price drops, but we're bound to see a crash. And the question is whether it's 10% or 35%. So that was their kind of debate. And I came out, I think, at the beginning of 2020 and said, no, actually, that doesn't compute. I said, because I still think the fundamentals of the property market are strong in terms of demand, cultural demand, low interest rates. And I predicted that the government would have to do something to shore up the market by way of stimulus because of the impact on the wider economy if house prices dropped. You can imagine the media headlines, house prices drop 25%. Then from an economy point of view, consumer spending stops, it's game over. So I kind of second guessed that. And yeah, look, turned out to be quite right. It was just saying off air, it's a source of much amusement for me when you see Savills, Knight Frank issuing a press release halfway through the year with a slightly revised forecast, which is based on the fact that the data has moved completely against them, which they didn't forecast. And so the forecast at the beginning of the year is pointless, but then they kind of congratulate themselves when they get to October that they're about to predict how house prices are going to end with 2 months of the year left. Anyway, so what was the question?
Sorry, where do people find? I mean, to talk up the others and to be slightly devil's advocate there for us. Where do we find your predictions? Where do we find your predictions at the beginning of a year? And if somebody wants to look at your predictions and compare them with the reality at the end of a year, where do they find that stuff, Russ?
I mean, in two places, either on social media where, I've been fairly bold and vocal, I think it's fair to say, to Twitter and LinkedIn. I write a column for Property Industry Eye, so I do that every couple of weeks or so when I have time. And so generally, I kind of put these things down digitally in writing on Property Industry Eye. And actually, at the beginning of the pandemic, so crikey, yeah, 2 years ago, I got so frustrated with people talking the market down that I started taking bets. We might have talked about this on our last encounter, but I said, look, if property prices drop, I'll bet money that they don't. And let's just say, I think I've had about 500 quid come in that I've donated to Great Ormond Street as a consequence of me being right and people like Paul Champlina and a few others on Twitter being wrong. So look, you can see the predictions and you can see the trail of what I said and what has actually happened, what the outcomes be. So look, to this year, I guess, is the question, isn't it? So 2022, I'd argue that it will be less uncertain this year because hopefully we're going to start to leave the pandemic behind us. Pandemics are obviously not a very good thing for any market because not just because they're negative, but because they create so much uncertainty. So it's very difficult to know how people are going to react and how that plays out economically when you've got the rigors of a medical emergency and all of the things that are attached to that. But I think what we'll see in 2022, we won't see house price growth as much as we saw in 2020-21. So just to give you kind of a reference point, house prices are 18% higher now than they were pre-pandemic. So February, March 2020 versus now, house prices are actually 18.7% higher according to the Office of National Statistics. Who would have thought? Well, actually, me, sorry. But anyway, so next year.
No, you say so yourself, Russ.
Yeah. So this year, I think we'll see UK house prices still go up because I think, again, the fundamentals are still sound. There's huge momentum in the market. We know that in terms of not just price, but transactions. Last year, as you conveyancers keep telling us, as if we're supposed to feel sorry for you, the transaction levels consumed everybody. Transaction levels were about 50% higher in 2021 versus 2020 and normal years. So that obviously isn't now going to be the case. A lot of people have pulled their decisions to buy and to sell forward because of the stamp duty holiday. So that's now all kind of come out of the system. So I think we'll see normality return, probably 900,000 transactions across the UK. House prices will increase, I would say, by 3 to 4%. So a normalized market fueled by that momentum, but also continuing low interest rates. Although rates are going up and they will continue to go up, I suspect we'll probably see rates at 1% by the end of the year to stem inflation, which actually, as of this morning, inflation now is at a 30-year high, but I think that's temporary. Let's be honest, if you're paying a mortgage that is linked to an interest rate of 1%, as in the Bank of England rate, as opposed to a 0.1%, it's not going to kill anybody. I mean, it literally will not make mortgages unaffordable. I think it's not enough to break positive sentiment. But I think the big news this year in the property market will be London. So London for the last 3 or 4 years has been not in decline, but it's certainly not grown like the rest of the UK. And a lot of that is because of the lack of confidence in the London market, because, of course, prices are already higher, but mainly because of overseas buyers. So for 2 years, really, we've not seen the normal level of overseas buyers that are able to be in London physically and look around, view and transact. That is now starting to come back. If you keep close to a lot of the London agents, particularly the prime and super prime guys like I do, they're all saying now that buyer demand, particularly from overseas, is really starting to accelerate. So I think London actually will outperform the rest of the UK for probably the first time statistically in 3 or 4 years. So I think we'll see London up by 5 to 6%.
And what's your view on transactions, number of transactions too? Are you seeing any, discernible dip?
There's been the immediate dip, but that was obviously to be expected, following stamp duty. Last year was so difficult in terms of, what to sort of pin your hat on. So you've had the aborted 30th of March deadline. You then had June, you then had September, you had pre-Christmas. So, of course, we've still been living, haven't we, largely on these peaks and troughs. And it's only now that we're really hoping to run, a smoother line, if you want to call it that. But for me, the demand for property is still so high and it's still so fashionable, isn't it? Property is fashionable. And I think at the moment, whilst the demand is so high, the supply is so low, I can't see why on earth the prices would dip. And I sort of agree with everything Russell said, which is a rarity. But no, on a serious note, no, I do agree with Russell. It's everything's about stability, isn't it? When things are stable, people have more confidence. So, for example, pre-pandemic, you had Brexit. Now, we had a dip on work with Brexit, practically, but I think it's just the uncertainty. It worries people. And when there's uncertainty, people worry, people don't commit. So this year, you would like to think, wouldn't you, that we're not going to have all this backwards and forwards. We're hopefully coming out of the pandemic. So I can't see why, with the certainty that this year will hopefully bring, with the demand as it is, we've probably been so fashionable. I can't see anything other than exactly what Russell said. I can't see it just increasing again. And, interest rates or not, as Russell said, it's not enough, is it? It's not enough of a deterrent. It's not enough for negativity. Practically, when people see that house, their dreams they want to buy or they want to invest, is that a deterrent? I don't think it is.
Well, they can still afford it, is the point. And it's, because of the way that interest rates are, most of us still remember the days of 10, 11, 12% mortgage rates. So relatively now, for me, when I was looking yesterday, that you can still, as a first-time buyer, get a mortgage with a 10% deposit of around 1.6% fixed.
It's funny, actually, Russ. We talked about that only recently about, lots of people, frankly, clients, buyers, sellers, and pundits and people in the industry, they're all too young to remember interest rates at that level. And when my friends,
so they're horrified, aren't they? They're horrified. They say, interest rates have gone from 0.1 to 0.25%.
I know, and they just can't compute when you say sort of 10 and 15% mortgage rates. Stu and I talked about it the other day in the context of the lenders perhaps removing some of the checks and balances around, checking on affordability, which personally I think is a bad idea, but I have to say. But I wonder,
great. It's wonderful. Remove all restrictions. Free market. Free market.
Well, yeah, I think I think though, because I think we can remember property crashes and negative equity and all the rest of it, that's not a nice place for people to be, quite frankly. And if a lender says, yeah, you can have this money, people are going to take it. That's human nature. So I think to remove the checks and balances, actually, particularly for people towards the bottom of the market, isn't a good idea, I have to say.
No, but let's be honest, the reason that in the 2008-9 financial crash happened was not because people had mortgages and and so on. It was because the bankers were trading the instruments around those mortgages.
Oh yeah. I'm not talking about that. I mean, I'm talking
uncertainty
about
caused the crash. But a lot of people
I agree,
say,
but I'm not talking about that one, Russ. I'm talking about the early 90s, because I qualified in 1991. I know I don't look old enough, and there was a crash then, and I lost my job and and as I say, my friends at the time who were going into decent professions and decent jobs were sort of lumbered with property and negative equity and all the rest of it, and they were the people who were going to be able to afford stuff, to be quite frank.
No, but it's a mere blip against a backdrop of the beauty of capitalism.
So do you think, Russ, that clearly, you've already mentioned the sort of, the top end of the market where, lovely people like yourself sort of glide around. But do you think that a sentiment might be dented later in the year with, cost of living, pinches if it happens, energy prices, do you think that's going to have an effect or not?
We're in an inflationary environment now, so we're at inflation at kind of 5.1%, I think it is. So as we said just now, the highest level in 3 decades. I think that will come out the system. A lot of that is kind of recovery related, where people are going out and doing things and buying things that's increasing inflation. But of course, a lot of it is caused by energy prices. And actually, if Russia decides to invade Ukraine over the next few days, then we might see energy prices increase even further, because that gas pipeline would be turned off. So that's horrifying. But the point is, the Bank of England, in all of their efforts to raise interest rates to try and quell inflation, can't do anything about energy prices. So it's a pointless endeavour to keep squeezing the consumer because of something that's completely outside either the Bank of England or the consumer's control. So I think inflation will be temporary, and I think it will start to dissipate. Look, I think there are too many other positives, really, in terms of the cost of money, wage growth. People don't talk about wage growth. Wage growth is running at about 5%. It's one of the highest levels of wage growth because, again, despite what the experts said 2 years ago, at the end of furlough, we'll see this huge drop off and there'll be mass unemployment. Well, actually, the opposite's happened. Unemployment numbers this week have dropped. So there are only 4% of the entire working population unemployed now, which is one of the lowest levels in history. We have one of the lowest unemployment levels in Western Europe. So I think there is demand for stuff, whether it's jobs or consumer goods or whatever. Yes, inflation is the kind of the temporary consideration, I suppose, but I just don't see that being a long-term problem or issue. I think we've got far more problems politically, frankly. We're now in a situation, and I don't know when you're going to publish this wonderful podcast, but as we sit here today, 52 letters are about to go into the 1922 committee to oust our prime minister, potentially. The implications of that, of course, economically, socially, are quite serious. But yeah, so that creates more uncertainty. But then let's hope. And look, can I just do a quick political bit? Let's hope if Boris Johnson goes, we actually get a Conservative prime minister, and all will be right with the world.
That part of political broadcast on behalf of Russell Quirk. So Stu, what were you guys? So that's, I think that's predictions. That's predictions based on.
I've got one quick question. I've got one quick question for you, Russell. So when we go out and speak to a lot of the agents that we deal with, the biggest sort of concern or moan Not that estate agents moan much, but one of the biggest concerns or moans that that I hear all the time is there's no pipeline, there's no properties come on the market. Anything that comes on, it sells straight away. And this is what I hear from geographically from north to south, east to west, from big to small in terms of agent size. So where do you sit on that front? Because it seems to me that the moan is that there's not enough property yet. You know, I'd quite like to be in a position that every time I got one on, I immediately sold it. So where do you stand on that point?
You can't odds estate agents moaning, I'm afraid. So no matter if it's a buyer's market, they moan. If it's a seller's market, they moan. And yes, it's true to say that property stock. I think that the average agent now is dealing with far less stock than they would have been 3 or 4 years ago. You know, the number used to be 40, 45. Listings per branch were kind of available at any one time. It's now down in the 30s, as I understand it. So yeah, look, there is an issue in terms of unavailability of stock. But look, that ebbs and flows. You know, I've been in the property market for 25 years, and that won't stay static. You know, and actually, you could argue if interest rates do increase, you know, perhaps that inspires a few more sellers to try and take advantage of the market as it is now, whereas they might be worried it's going to kind of lean up and dilute in 6 to 12 months time, so that you might see some more sellers. The numbers actually that I saw from Rightmove this week show that the amount of valuations, so I know Lorraine likes stats, so here's another one, the amount of valuations that are being booked by agents in January so far is up about 40% on this time last year, but also January 2020. So it appears that sellers are kind of coming back. Bearing in mind, look, they've all been concerned about COVID, showing people around their houses in a COVID environment. You know, the spectre of stamp duty pulling deals forward, as I've said. But I also think, and look, here's me being outspoken again. Estate agents don't do themselves any favors sitting on their arses waiting for the phone to ring. Frankly, you know, if you're an agent that wants stock, go out and get it. Go out and find it. Knock on some doors. Do some leaflets. Be innovative. Don't keep talking about, you know, how great you are on a pie chart on Facebook and LinkedIn. And look at my market share compared to agent 2 and agent 3. No one cares, right? No one cares. But do go out and extol the virtues of your service and your experience and your professionalism, the stuff you've sold and what you sold it for compared to asking price and so on. Agents in this country, I think, are really backward when it comes to marketing, and the majority sit there waiting for it to land on their laps. Those that win are those that do not wait for it to land on their laps. They go out and get it.
Well, I mean, lots of interesting points to come out of that, Russ. But one of the things, you know, this might segue almost seamlessly as if we prepared what we were going to say into sort of talking about social media, because, you know, you are proper PR. Social media is your thing. PR is what you do, and PR is what you're very good at. Just to go back a step, that's why I like the fact that you back up what you say by stats with the stats, because some people might say, oh, Quirk talks nonsense. But at the end of the day, well, love you or hate you, you do at least back up what you say with some statistics rather than, you know, talking out every other hole, frankly. But as the man who's, you know, riding the wave of social media and, you know, slagging off just about everybody that's in his path, you just said that agents should go out and put leaflets out. And that's really interesting. Is that, I mean, genuinely, did you mean that?
Oh yeah, leaflets. Look, I still have an interest in an estate agency business. Yeah, leaflets are still one of the most productive and practical ways and cost-effective ways of getting business. I mean, and look, I don't just mean do 10 and hope that you get 4 listings from it. You got to do 10,000, and then you got to do 10,000 to the same houses a month later with a slightly different message. Then you got to do it again. Social media, great, you know, and you, look, there's loads of tools now like Spectre and kind of, you know.
Loads of tools. Most of them are working in conveyancing, mate.
Well, we'll come on to that. But there are loads of tools to go out and prospect, but that's what you've got to be proactive. You know, you've got to go out and grab the business. And you know, there's a saying I heard recently, which is grab more than your fair share, right? And don't be ashamed about it. So if a market's made up of 100%, and there's 10 agents, well, don't settle for 10%. You want to do what I did, as Stu will remember, at Quirk with my cousin Anthony. We wanted and got 25 to 30%, which meant that there was some of the stragglers doing 4% of the business, but we took 25 to 30% by being bolder and a bit cleverer and spending more money on marketing. But just the business is there to be taken. it's archaic to me to think that most estate agents sit there waiting for leads to pop up, and then they might ring some of those leads and they might follow them up. But generally they don't. Do they follow up their old customers that moved 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago? I bet even Countrywide and Connells and the big boys that have been around for 40, 50 years, I bet they don't even do that. There needs to be a fundamental sea change when it comes to how we prospect and nurture potential sellers and therefore leads in this industry, in this country. Go to the US, right? I've done it, and I'm going to the US in 4 weeks to a massive real estate convention. And why do I go? Because honestly, guys, those guys over there in the US are fascinating in terms of how they have nailed prospecting, marketing, technology, culture. And that's why estate agents in the US, some of them earn $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year. And you say that to UK agents, they go, nah, never going to happen here. Well, I tell you what, there are now UK estate agents, people like Dominic Marcel and Alex Harvey, who won't mind mentioning them, that do earn £200,000 to £300,000 a year because they've got off their asses and made it happen.
So that's kind of I think a perfect segue into what you boys were gossiping about before we came on air as I joined you. So come on, Stu, like the touch paper, mate. What were you talking about to Russ? We
can't have a show with Russell and then not bring up the infamous article that he wrote about his opinions on conveyancing. So Russell, in a nutshell, what did you say for those that might not have seen it?
Yeah, for the two people that didn't say it, your article just before Christmas, you did warn us. I did say, oh, what is he going to say? So in a nutshell, small type. What was your proposition, Russ?
I don't know what you're talking about. I don't remember any such article. I wrote that article was specifically really about Simplify and their problems. And I was getting more and more exasperated as a PR guy with Simplify's inability or unwillingness to communicate to the state what was going on, how they were going to remedy being out of action effectively for, I think at that point they were 5 weeks in, and all there was on their website was this stupid statement that just said, due to a slight technical hitch, there may be some disruption to some of our customers. The reality was their system had completely fallen over. We think they'd been hacked, but rather than entering into an approach which should have been, as a crisis PR strategy, openness, transparency, and actually they might have got a bit of sympathy. Instead, they've irritated property media, other conveyancers, property buyers, property sellers, and the estate agents that refer to them. So that business, I could see, it will now be, I think, almost irreparably damaged by not the problem, but the way they handled the problem. So I started writing this article, which was critical of Simplify, this huge business. I think they're responsible for, forgive me if I'm wrong, about 15% of all conveyancing cases in the UK, now that they are the size that they are. And I thought it was appalling. I still think it's appalling. There's still been nothing. And by the way, I checked with all the trade press. Guess how many press releases Simplify sent out to explain what was happening or to mitigate the position to the trade press?
None.
Zero. No press release. How can you not send a press release out when your business has fallen over, affecting thousands of property buyers, sellers, and agents? That is disgraceful and appalling. So
I think, though, Russ, just to cut across you there, though, lovely, because I think what's interesting about the article and the results and the responses to it is, Simplify was the premise of the article, and then
I expanded. But
that was the thing, and nobody will remember.
You couldn't help yourself.
Nobody will remember the article was about Simplify, because everyone else was appalled about the second half of it. So without going through every single terrible point you made, Russ, what was the central point leading on from your criticism of Simplify?
So the central point was that we shouldn't be surprised about Simplify's approach, because it typified the way that conveyancers transact transactions generally, right? Which is that from an estate agent perspective, no communication, stuff takes longer than it should do and was purported to, in terms of asking the conveyancer where we are, and generally the kind of the mishmash of conveyancing now, deals taking longer, lack of communication, and things just simply being a bit of a mess. was akin to the way that Simplify had also handled their problem. So it ended up being an article that kind of roasted Simplify, but then, yes, also then roasted the conveyancing sector on the basis that everything had gotten busier, as we've just talked about, so transactions up and so on. But my criticism was that what conveyancers then did in terms of reaction was just to lament the fact that everything's busy, and therefore that's the problem. So rather than saying, okay, we could see 18 months ago the way this was going, so what we did was we put certain things into place. So whether it was the adoption of further technology, or whether it was people, or whether it was operational processes or efficiencies, none of that seems to be apparent. And it was kind of the tail wagging the dog. So the market's then wagging the conveyancing sector's dog, if you like. And it was just a tale of woe from conveyancers that, oh, well, poor us, we're just really busy. And that's why it's now taking, I think it's Get Agent's number is 26 weeks to get a deal through from offer to exchange of contracts. And look, I know there's mitigating circumstances, local authority searches, you know, a mortgage offer's taking longer. I know all that. But then I got onto the criticism. My pet thing with you lot, frankly, is the consecutive nature of conveyancing rather than the parallel nature that I think should prevail. And yeah, I did get a little bit of stick, I think someone told me.
Yeah, you did. I think the thing is though, Russ, and I mean, I'll pass over to Stu in a minute, because like, you know, we're clearly, you know, not going to have a YouTube spat about your views on conveyancers. So I do actually want to talk about social media more broadly in a sec, and we could spend the next hour arguing. But I think, you know, and a point that Stu and I have made on more than one occasion on here is, of course, 18 months ago, you know, March 2020, you know, the market effectively shut down. And of course, and it's not an excuse, it's just a fact, conveyancers at that point weren't in a position to recruit and get IT in and everything else. A load of them went out of business. And then we came belting out of it with the stimulus that you've already mentioned. And people just weren't in a position to react as quickly as you seem to suggest they could have done. I totally accept the point that for businesses to thrive, they should have been thinking about it before that. That's a different discussion. But well, Stu, over to you. What's your view?
I think one of the problems is that there are elements of what Russell has said, which I agree with. I think there are procedures, there are conveyancers even out there that are still operating, you know, in an archaic way. I think there's lots of practices out there that don't. So I think there's a balanced view that has to be taken. In terms of running a business in conveyancing, yeah, there are lots of things that you have to take into account, as you would in a pandemic with loads of different other industries. I think, from my perspective, it's a difficult one because I sit on the fence, Russell. That I mean, I don't believe it. I didn't know the average was 26 weeks. We had it down as 21. We made it quite clear. It's a long time. But we make it quite, but what you use the words from offer to completion. Yeah. We don't look at it from offer to completion, because when I speak to estate agents, and when estate agents are critical of the conveyancing process, I always have to make the point, the conveyancing process, let's start from when we receive estate agents' particulars. And of course, when you speak to an estate agent, good or bad, they will have their own sort of thoughts based on their own standards. So, for example, a deal may be tied up, you know, on day one, and it may take, say, 20 days for us to receive sales particulars. Mm-hmm. So already 20 days is lost. And I'm not so sure whether there's, you know, we're looking at the conveyancing process, or are we looking at the whole moving process? And maybe there's problems throughout, and it's
the latter. And look, I mean, the fact you can take an agent 20 days to send over sales particulars in an age of email.
If we get them sometimes. And sometimes, yes, and you know, in terms of sort of upfront information, which is spoken about every single day on millions of different mediums, we were punting that 10 years ago internally as a way to win business, but estate agents didn't want to adopt it.
I know. So look, here's my point. I think that conveyancers and estate agents are obviously, you know, kind of forced together and linked in terms of them both having the same desired outcome. There's this kind of irritable relationship between the two, even though the goal, the destination is the same, because they're kind of treading all over each other. And of course, no one really gets paid, I suppose, so the pressure's on and so on. So there has to be a way of trying to join those two entities up. I did suggest, I think actually, Stu, your sister was at a conference I did 2 or 3 years ago where I stood up and said that estate agents should take over conveyancing. I think we talked about that. So that it's all, sorry.
Hey, that was like estate agents should take over conveyancing. Is that a bit of music? Is that a little fanfare that plays every time you utter those words?
Well, every time I make many statements, Sky News.
Fanfare.
Sky News trumpet what I've said. No, but this is the point. So when I write this stuff, I mean, genuinely, I write from the head and the heart. So I genuinely believe everything I say.
That's not where some people would say, Russ, to be honest. But there we go.
From another orifice. Yeah. But look, I'm afraid, I'm one of the only people in the property industry that writes anything that gets people talking, that starts to create debate, and actually, genuinely, hand on heart, apart from the fact that sometimes I just feel really passionate and pissed off about something, so I write about it. Is there an element that I think is entertaining, where I kind of go off and I do my kind of, tongue-in-cheek, lampoonery bit within the article? Yeah, I definitely do that. And if it doesn't make anybody else laugh, believe me, it makes me laugh, right? So that's kind of what counts. But honestly, sincerely, genuinely, when I write stuff, it is about creating dialogue and debate, because I then hope to hell that we might actually end up with improvement and benefit. So rather than, and look, estate agents are as bad as conveyancers, I think. I'm not saying that estate agents have no negative part to play in the fundamental failings of the moving process, but it's not good enough for us all to sit here in 2022 when, look, we were talking about this shit, sorry, back in 84, right? 84, when I started in estate agents, it was the same problems, right? What we never do is sit down in a room or in a forum and say, okay, forget whose fault it is, forget what the process is now. How do we solve this? So
but
how do we not be the worst country in the world for getting a sale from start to finish? We are one of the worst in the world.
Become way too fractured. I'm at the outside looking in, and I that's why I picked up on your leaflets phrase. I'm a middle-aged woman of a certain age, Russ, and my view, for what it's worth, which isn't very much, there are too many vested interests now, and particularly, proptech's piled in, and there's a lot to be, clearly there are benefits to be had. But it's interesting because Stu a while ago used the phrase, conveyancers working in an archaic way. Well, to be frank, the recent events with Simplify, and they probably, to be fair to them, won't be the only one. Clearly, prop tech and streamlining isn't the answer. So prop tech versus no prop tech or whatever, that's not, I don't think, the issue really in many ways. Great. A lot of it is about communication. People don't communicate. But the snag now, Russ, I think, is that there are just far too many individual vested interests. There are far too many organisations that are happy to take their bit of the conveyancing pie. It's not in their interest to sit in a room and say, let's improve the process. Everyone's just seen this is a great big market in the UK, and quite understandably, and I'm not criticising anybody, but we're going to have our slice of the pie. You're never ever going to get all the organisations that you need to agree.
It really needs, and I mean really needs, 10 or 12 smart people who have a vested interest in the process being better, whoever they are, to come up with a solution. And I think you could do it in a year. And yes, it will need government help. It will need a change of legislation. It will need lenders to come on board. But what we can't have is this ridiculous status quo that agents moan about, but don't seem to want to do anything to solve. And conveyancers lament, but also, I've never heard ever a conveyancer say, well, I'll tell you what the solution is. I've never heard those words. I hear excuses as to why, it takes 6 months because it's him, it's her, it's up, it's down, or whatever.
But Russell, I don't hear solutions. But just to interrupt slightly there, but that you almost outlined the whole point. And the whole point is not necessarily blaming those, him, her, etc., but him, her are so integral to the conveyancing transaction that you can be the best conveyancer in the world. But if him and her, whether that be surveyors, you can't get a survey booked, so the mortgage offer takes forever to come out. Whether it be management companies and production of leasehold packs, whether it be searches, you can go on and on and on. But with so many different people, so many spokes of that wheel. It's not, in my mind, it's everybody. Everybody's the problem, because everybody, and I would also make the point that I'm not sure whether we should be judging whether the process is defunct or not during a pandemic. I think, that did create.
I think we knew before the pandemic it was defunct.
Yeah, but we weren't talking 26 weeks before the pandemic. So whether it's as bad as I think people.
You're right. But tell me, why isn't it reduced now? It's not the pandemic; it's the stamp duty holiday and the impetus of transactions.
Yeah,
So,
but
now we're 4 months away from the stamp duty holiday, and I don't see anything going any quicker than it was, 8 months ago.
But before that, we were talking, say, 12 weeks was an average. So there's a big difference between 12 and 26. But the same criteria applied then than it does now. And that is, it doesn't matter what you do when you are so dependent on, your clients.
But they're problems, but they're also the solution.
Sorry to cut across you, but didn't you count, Stu, that in any, on a transaction, you could be involved with something like 19 separate other parties?
Yeah, on a leasehold transaction, you could have 19.
I get it. But we're doing now what I'm criticising. So
I'm not making it the excuse.
I'm talking about sticking all that up on a wall and saying, right, so how do we solve the problem of chains? Because chains.
But Russell, I'm not saying that the 19 spokes is the excuse. What I'm saying is that we're all to blame in our own different kind of way. And until such time, as you quite rightly say, get everybody together, it's a complete waste of time if everybody wants to sort of knock the conveyancers over the head, because you're never ever actually going to achieve anything.
So if I did a flow chart now of all of the, not just the process points within conveyancing, but the problems and the elements of peril within the conveyancing process that lead to delays and fall throughs, let's say there might even be 100 of those nodes, right? If you want to call it that, right? Then solve each one. So for instance, I've been an entrepreneur for years. I believe in problem solving. I don't believe that saying, but local authority searches take 3 months is a reason not to solve that problem. The problem then is not to go to the local authorities, of which there are 440, and try and solve that problem with them. The solution is to cut out the local authority and use title insurance, for instance. That's how we should be thinking. It's not,
but as an example, Russell, but an example to that would be that it's taken too much of a simplistic view on things. For example, not all banks accept title insurance.
Yeah, but then that's another issue to solve with the bank.
So my point is, it's not, immediately we just spoke about two things just there: banks, and local authorities. It's not always the conveyancer. And it's not excuses or anything like that. But until such time as you get all the parties, all the spokes in that wheel around the same table, and everybody actually wants that change, then you won't actually solve it.
I suspect many of those people, those involvements, will need to be cut out of the process. The very nature of the fact that there are so many stakeholders in a conveyancing process.
I don't think even the stakeholders is the issue. I mean, I do think that the stakeholders aren't going to absent themselves because they've got a lot of people have got too much money invested and too much vested interest. I think that actually only be changed when it's mandated, frankly, the government has just got too much else on its plate at the moment. But also I do think, and again, I'm old enough to remember, and Stu and I have talked about this, Russ, on more than one occasion over the 12, 18 months we've been doing this. And one of the problems, I think, is that you two have just mentioned two of the things that are central to conveyancing and have always been, that being local searches and mortgages. And actually, for one, I'm not a fan of indemnity insurance for local search issues, because I think people genuinely want to know if the road's adopted and genuinely want to know if something, is going to be, there's going to be a road within 200 yards of the house. But that's a different point. But the point about this, of course, is the vast number of other semi-quasi-regulatory issues that have been imposed on conveyancers over the years, like bloody fencer certificates, like, building regs, like planning, and of course the big one being AML. They are all non-title issues that now can massively clog up the conveyancing process. I can't imagine there's a conveyancer watching this that wouldn't be delighted to bin off all of that. And if we get to digital identity, that's great, and that's a direction of travel. That's where the land registry is going. They're piloting it with some lenders now. Great. But again, the issue is one of liability. Who picks up the tab if there's fraud? If conveyancers would be delighted not to have to piddle around and do all that. Similarly with AML, you can take a month at the beginning of a transaction, Russ, just working out where somebody's money has come from. So actually a lot of the conveyancing process isn't conveyancing at all. It's just all the other stuff that we've sort of sucked up over the years. I mean, not we.
I get that, and look, we're not going to solve it on this call, but
no, that's true.
I'm very tempted, seriously, to make my next big project trying to solve the problem of, and look, let's not call it conveyancing, the problem of the property transaction, right? Because it's a holistic thing, isn't it? But yeah, look, it can be solved. I think it's a very exciting opportunity, frankly, to try and solve it. Whoever does solve it to the benefit of the consumer and conveyancers will make hundreds of millions of pounds, because it's one of the biggest problems that the property industry faces. So I'm going to start working on it a bit later on this afternoon.
Marvellous. Well, in that, I think probably on that, I think Stu and I will, if hundreds of millions of pounds are in the pot there as a potential, Russ, then Stu and I will obviously be happy to join you in those discussions. But that's probably as good a place as any, on a positive note, to thank you for your insights, controversy, rudeness, swear words, and general marviness.
Well,
so thanks for joining us, Russ.
Always a pleasure. And next time I write something, I'll look forward to you inviting me back to grill me over it in the future.
Yeah. Well, you can guarantee that we will.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Pleasure. And seriously, agents, property people, and conveyancers, we should genuinely do these things more often, because I think eventually we will get to a better place as a joint industry.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Take care, guys. See you soon.
Bye.